So anyway, it's really nice to be back here, and I wanted to offer a provocation and share a little bit about what is in my second book. So I decided to call our conversation today the Creativity Upgrade. So just a little bit more context about me. I struggled probably up until my early 30s with the reality that I am incredibly hybrid. I remember in my 20s, I used to get frustrated with my friends who worked on Wall Street, who were, I thought, very condescending to folks who worked in the arts and the creative economy. And they would look down on them as if they were like really naive, and I missed the boat. And then similarly, I really would get similarly frustrated with friends who worked in the creative economy and nonprofit sector who looked at people in corporate as the man and as people who had sold out. I never really I saw the lines as very blurred. I understood the intersection between those realms and how interdependent they were, and I was very comfortable in both. What was challenging was that I was educated in an environment like most of us where you're asked to choose a specialization, a focus area, and then to work in environments where you work in departments. And it really wasn't until I had the amazing opportunity to naively earn my PhD while working full-time, so I thought it was just a big paper at the end, that I realized there was this whole field in space where I could really practice a very integrative way of working and thinking. It was a hook upon which I could hang my hat. And so that was part of what led to all of my colleagues here helping to launch the Strategic Design MBA program. Well, a lot of the work that I do these days at Figurative Thinking is in the space of change management. And sadly, I'm often invited in when shit's hit the fan. and often when people finally realize that it's culture stupid. I think I should have a t-shirt that says it's culture stupid. But and I know there's been so much change here at the university, but when you ask this question, who wants change, everyone's hands goes up. But what we forget is that we each have our own kind of internal narrative of what that actually means. So when it comes to who wants to change, what's really involved with that, no matter what part of the stakeholder map you're part of, hands go down. So this is a photo of a friend of mine, and this is Mark on the right side of the screen. And Mark and I met in 2015 in Nice, France. Mark is Estonian, and he used to be the head of innovation at SEB Bank. And so he would, on a regular basis, commute between Tallinn, Estonia, to Stockholm, Sweden. And as director of innovation, he was really tasked with trying to innovate. So fast forward, we met in 2015, fast forward to 2018, and we are working as coaches in this entrepreneurship boot camp, this time in Shenzhen, China. And we're at breakfast one morning, catching up, and Mark casually references the chip in his hand. And I said, hey, did you just say you have a chip in your hand? And he said, yeah, I have a chip in my hand. I said, wait a minute, what? Can I feel it? And he reached out his hand, and it felt like a little tiny bone spurt just coming at the fleshy base of his thumb. And I said, wait, why do you have a chip in your hand? And he explained that at SEB, it's an international Swedish bank, as head of the innovation center and his colleagues in innovation, they thought they needed to walk the talk. They couldn't just say that they were about innovation, they had to actually demonstrate it. So he explained that they started to have bear and chips parties, get it, bear and chips, inserting a chip. They have tattoo artists come and inject a chip. And these chips was totally opt-in. And these chips, he uses his to enter the building, to lock his bicycle. He thinks he may eventually use it to for public transportation. But he was telling me that he was actually a laggard. He wasn't an early adopter of this technology. And we just got into a conversation about what it would take to do some of that. And I said, I can't imagine ever doing something like that. And it was really interesting being in a place like Shenzhen, China, where QR codes are used to pay for everything, for the food truck on the street to the little taxi bicycle guy. You pay, it's virtually a cashless society. Having this conversation with an Estonian, head of innovation in Sweden, to an American, where I thought I was really innovative because I could use my Apple Pay on my iPhone at the Acme. So, there's a culture of innovation, right? And the political economy of an environment really adds to it. So, all this to say that a lot of that interaction, that conversation is really nestled into what we think about in terms of the future of work. And right now, there are two divergent narratives when it comes to the future of work. One is a dystopian narrative, which is running for the hills, the robots are taking over, and there will be no agency for what's human and humanness. And the other narrative is totally utopian. You have nothing to worry about. Things are pretty much going to say, yeah, you'll keep your job. And really, the truth is somewhere in the middle. It's kind of what a colleague of mine, Natalie Nixon, who's an expert in augmented reality, calls a heterotopia. It's a little bit of both. So, as we think about the future of work, I always believe it's important to have some hindsight in order to derive insights for foresight. And as Mary Beth mentioned, I have a background in anthropology and fashion, and worked a lot in textiles. And this is a photograph from 1912 at a spinning mill in Massachusetts. And what I think is particularly striking about this photograph when I look at it is how aligned these women's bodies are with the machine, right? It's almost like they are becoming one with technology. And that was a big emphasis in this particular industrial revolution. It was about efficiencies, and it was about how we could reduce what it meant to be uniquely human in order to have really efficient output. And then we have the film that Charlie Chaplin was in, where he literally becomes one with machine at a certain phase of the film. So what the cautionary tale is there, in my opinion, is that we have to hope for in what is the fourth industrial revolution, because the train has left the station. It's not like we're headed to the fourth industrial revolution. We are currently in the fourth industrial revolution. What is really an opportunity, something that Mary Beth referenced, that I think that you guys are working on here, is making sure we have a shift away from humans merging to technology, not exactly to my comfort level of technology merging to humans as we saw with my friend Bart, but looking at an opportunity for technology to amplify what is uniquely human. If any of you saw the Super Bowl, and the best part of the Super Bowl, sorry, Super Bowl fans, the commercials, especially halftime, but there was this really good commercial that Google had, and in this Google commercial, you hear an elderly man's voice, and he's saying, I'm forgetting what Greta was the AI name. Greta, remind me of her favorite jokes. Greta, remind me of where we fell in love. Greta, remind me of our anniversary, or when we used to love to take a walk. And, my eyes were welling up with tears, because that was a commercial that, to me, exhibited the idealized opportunity of how technology can amplify what is uniquely human, rather than the robots are taking over. So a creativity leap is really important and necessary for this fourth industrial revolution, an opportunity to use technology to amplify what's uniquely human. So I want to take a moment, and I'm going to get to how I define creativity, because I know that's super important. But before I do that, I want to share kind of how I even got interested in creativity, not so much innovation, but really creativity, and really honing in on creativity. And I began to pay attention to what I call signals on the landscape. So I want to share some of those signals on the landscape that I started to see. One signal was a report that came out from the management consultancy Capgemini. And in the very first paragraph, they share a statistic which said that since, and the report came out in 2016, and the first couple of sentences references that since the year 2000, 52% of the Fortune 500 companies have either failed, gone bankrupt, or been acquired. And then the whole report goes on to explain why that is. And a lot of interesting ideas about why, but ultimately, what it really drilled down to, in my view, is that companies had this inability to really be adaptive, right? They either had a too big to fail, and most of them had a too big to fail mentality, which means that when they looked in the rearview mirror, they didn't really see anyone, and they kind of got super comfortable. But they also didn't have a capacity and a competency among their employees to be flexible, curious, adaptive, and not assume anything. So that human quotient of always being prescient and aware of your surroundings, in my view, was a signal in the landscape from this Capgemini report. Another signal in the landscape, which Mary Beth has referenced, which I find super interesting. The World Economic Forum in 2016 was predicting that by 2020, right now, creativity would rank number 3 among the top 10 job skills in 2020. And as Mary Beth referenced, the number 1 and number 2 job skills were critical thinking and problem solving, which, by the way, are all still part of creativity, right? So creativity net is really rising as the number 1 job skill. Interestingly, 5 years ago, they were only predicting that creativity would rank around number 10. So it's really risen in resonance for people. Another signal on the landscape, this also from the World Economic Forum. They talk a lot about the role of trust and values in the 4th Industrial Revolution, which I think is super interesting, given that a lot of what we think about and emphasize in the 4th Industrial Revolution is ubiquitous technology of robotics and AI and AR and VR, right? But they are still highlighting how important, because of that, the human quotient of trust and values will be really important. Another signal on the landscape, this came out in August of this past summer, August 2019. Business Insider announced that there was a convening of the leaders of, let's just call the Fortune 50 companies, right? Real exclusive, top dog companies. And they decided, wait for it, that shareholder value, that stakeholder value was as important, maybe more important than shareholder value, right? Now, a lot of people kind of scoffed at this announcement and said, well, we gotta wait and see to understand how seriously they were really going to take the role of stakeholders. And then we get to January of this year, and Larry Fink, the chairman and CEO of BlackRock. BlackRock, by the way, has $7 trillion, so the T as in Tom. BlackRock has $7 trillion in assets under management. And every year, around January, their CEO, Larry Fink, writes a letter to other CEOs, and he kind of gives his prediction about what really matters. This January, he talked about how they would make a concerted effort to begin exiting their investing in companies that had a sustainability-related risk, and they would be very actively prioritizing sustainability efforts when investing in new companies. When 7 trillion AUM company like BlackRock says that this is now what they're prioritizing, the human element, something that will require creativity in order to discern how we're going to problem solve with really finite resources. People listen because other companies could likely see divestment by BlackRock from their companies, which makes them tremble in their boots. This is another signal landscape. TV has never gotten better. So I really have been enjoying certain shows, and these are 2 shows that my family, we really have liked to watch. So one show is Blackish, and the young guy on the left-hand side of the screen is Junior. And on the right side of the screen is the character named, I think her name is Abigail. She is the daughter of the character played by Reese Witherspoon. And same season, both of these teenagers in their character, in the storyline, are announcing to their parents, we're not going to college. We're taking a gap year. And this young lady says, in fact, I'm not even taking a gap year. I already have a job at startup. So she's totally mixing the idea. And the reason why I think this is a really interesting signal on the landscape is because we're seeing so many pressures of higher education. Everything from the revenue model, the cost of maintaining and sustaining institutions to, on the market side, on the supply side, young people really questioning the ROI and wanting to learn in very different ways, wanting to learn by doing, wanting to learn through what I think will be a return to a different type of apprenticeship model. And then Satya Nadella, who would have found that as the CEO of one of the most prominent tech firms, has written a book, it's came out almost 2 years ago now, where he uses the word soul in the subtitle. So here we have a tech company that is recognizing this human element. And this is a Canadian bank, ATB. What I was browsing their blog, and the section where they're describing their mortgage instruments, they're talking about love. Not only are they talking about love, they're talking about how one of their colleagues, a behavioral neuroscientist named Trudy Chalmers, helps them to understand the role of emotions in a customer-facing business like finance, right? So they're learning to shift away from falling in love with their products and their apps and their financial instruments to falling in love with the needs and the perspective of their customers. Because from the customer's perspective, it's a life-changing moment to be able to buy a home, or you have to expand your home footprint because you have baby, you're finally able to start putting money away for college. So speaking of Trudy Chalmers at ATB, she used to be at ATB, who was this behavioral neuroscientist. Again, another signal on the landscape that's matching this, another one of my favorite shows, Billions. This character is Wendy Rose, who works at Axe Capital, which is this badass, this testosterone-driven venture capital firm in New York, and she's a psychologist. So here we have very different types of job descriptions and job titles and competencies at the C-suite level in really traditional types of companies. So this article title from the Wall Street Journal 4 years ago is something that we're seeing more and more, where employers are finding soft skills, like those soft skills that they're cultivating while students here are in short supply, and they are increasingly short supply. But I have a small problem with that title, which is that soft skills are not touchy-feely, right? Soft skills are actually quite hardcore. They are essential competencies to develop so we understand how to collaborate, we understand the needs of a market, and we understand how to do business in an optimal way. And soft skills are becoming important because of these VUCA environments that we all have to survive in. And the VUCA is this mnemonic, which means volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Does anyone know where the term VUCA came from? Yes?
Part of the tense.
That's right. And actually, in a little college right down the road in Carlisle, PA, I think it's called the College of the Army. So some of our best innovation actually comes from the armed services, scenario planning, design thinking. They really can test out quite a bit in the military before it started entering academia and then the business space. But the VUCA environment, this was a mnemonic that came up when we first entered Afghanistan, and for obvious reasons, the terrain was volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, and then that term got adopted by corporate America. So when we think about these soft skills, especially when Larry Fink came out with his letter last month, really admonishing companies to get it together and have a really a strategy full of clear tactics about how they're going to deal with sustainability. Things like a call to action on sustainability are about an ethical compass. These are the soft skills that are going to be critical for leadership. in companies on Wall Street and on Main Street. So it's because we have to deal with these fluid environments that are complex that we need these soft skills, but let's also be a little, or any kind of fear or anxiety we have about how we're going to grapple this. I hope that your fears are a bit assuaged, because complexity is not new. I was in January, I spent some time in Doha, Qatar, which is in the middle of the desert, beautiful, beautiful part of the world in the Middle East, right on the Arabian Sea. And when you're in that part of the world, you're so aware of how you're in this intersection of ancient civilization, but also this total embrace of contemporary technology. When we did a few trips out to the desert, while we did some pyramids, this is just a reminder that we have, as a civilization, dealt with complexity in the past. It's just that now it looks a little different. But navigating complexity is something that will never be ending for humans. And when we think about things like augmented reality, we need to become much more adept at identifying new ways to deliver experiences and services, and things like augmented reality help us to do that. So in my view, because we're surrounded with complexity, and because of all these signals in the landscape I've been observing, I really think one way to go about it to manage complexity is with complexity. And creativity is actually a complex system. So this phrase, this idea is really this idea of, you know, when you're walking along and you step in a wad of chewing gum, what's the best way to remove the chewing gum? A stick, yes. How else might you remove chewing gum? Or if you get stuff in your hand? Ice, yes. More gum, right? The way you can remove chewing gum is with more chewing gum. The way we can deal with complexity and navigate and manage complexity is with complexity. And creativity is a complex system. So what is creativity? Now we're at the part where I don't have as long a definition as the gentleman on one of those early slides that Margaret showed. I define, well, actually, before I say that, when we think about creativity, sometimes we think about painters, or we think about musicians jamming in a band, or we may think of dancers on a stage, and that might be your go-to impression and recall when you think about creativity. Well, my next book, The Creativity Leap, I explain another way to think about creativity. And the way I think about it is that it's our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. It's our ability to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems and produce novel value. And I think when we think of creativity in that way, all of a sudden it opens it up to understanding how many of us have to exhibit and exercise creativity every single day. To be human is to be hardwired to be creative. And so what I did in preparation for that book, The Creativity Leap, is I interviewed over 50 people who come from a real diverse range of sectors and backgrounds to understand how creativity shows up in their work. So I'm going to share a few. This is Gary and Amy Mainoff. They are farmers at the Mainoff Fruit Farm in New Hope, Pennsylvania. Over the summer months, they grow peaches, and then towards the fall, they grow apples. And when I visited with them, I left being convinced that farmers are the original hackers. I mean, we think we have to survive in a VUCA environment, dealing with the marketplace and recruiting students and whatever it is that your work is. When you're talking about having to deal with Earth, every single day there is ambiguity and complexity and huge uncertainty. And one of the big things they shared with me was their next big creative insight, because every single season they have to figure out what's the new thing that we can develop to bring people to the small 5-acre farm. It's not a huge farm, but it's a working 5-acre farm, and I highly recommend you visit them. You will become a fruit snob. There you go. Because you will really begin to taste a real apple, a real nectarine, a real peach versus others. But what you're seeing them stand in front of is a cidery that they started. And this has been in the making for probably about 3 years to understand how they can convert all the leftover, wounded, castaway apples into a product that will start to attract new people. And they prototyped it a lot with their own team and their staff, and bit by bit they have about 6 different varieties of ciders now on the farm. Someone else who, I went to Pasadena, California, and visited some folks at NASA at the Jet Propulsion Lab. So what the Jet Propulsion Lab does is they're focused mainly kind of on unmanned trips to outer space. And they had embedded at the Jet Propulsion Lab in Pasadena, California, something called the Studio. And I kind of walked away realizing that the big takeaway from the people at the studio is that it's super helpful in an organization to have an internal built-in group of instigators. And so this is a totally interdisciplinary group of designers, anthropologists, psychologists, physicists, artists, who are working on helping the research scientists communicate and storytell about their project. Because sometimes the scientists they're so much in the weeds of their projects, it's very hard for them to communicate what this exciting work is and why it matters. And this is the group that helps them do that. So they really are provocateurs and translators, working in a totally interdisciplinary way. The woman on the left-hand side of the screen is Céline Barrel. She is very French. We met at an event about 2 years ago now, and she is a nose. She's a perfumier at the International Fragrances and Flavors, and I visited, after we met, I visited her at the lab at IF, which is this really incredible intersection of ambiguity and the magical, subjective nature of scent, along with hardcore chemistry and exact formulation. And she shared a story about when she was in business school in France. The others who were studying international marketing and corporate finance and the hardcore important stuff, kind of like, they thought it was sweet what she was doing, that she was going to apply her MBA to something like scent and perfume. And she said, but she said to me, I realized I had a superpower. I had the ability to make real what no longer is. And what she meant by that is that when we smell something, it can evoke a time, a person who may no longer be with us. So for example, for me, it's original scent Jergens lotion. And it reminds me of being like 6 years old, and it was the lotion of choice after been playing outside all day in the summertime, got a bath, and that's the smell that just makes it, still to this day, is a comfort smell that's very refreshing, and it looks being taken care of. This guy is familiar to a lot of you. This is Randy Slur. Randy was at Philadelphia University at the time when I was also teaching here. He was the provost here. And he now is vice president for learning features at Autodesk, a major tech firm in San Francisco. And I interviewed Randy, and he really hit me to this idea of orthogonal thinking, right? And the importance, once again, just similar to NASA, of having these creative abrasion teams, these really diverse teams, where you can have the stickiness and collision of ideas, because I could never think of the questions asked that you would think of, and vice versa. In order to unpack a problem, the more diverse the inputs, the more innovative the output. This is a friend of mine, Nicole Pittman. This was an example of, sometimes you have a friend and you think, oh, they're pretty cool. And then you go to an awards ceremony for them, you're like, wow, she's really badass. So Nicole is an attorney, and we used to be neighbors here in Philly, and she now lives in San Francisco. And she is, unbeknownst to me, I kind of knew, but I really didn't understand the breadth and depth of her work until I went to this awards ceremony for her at the Constitution Center. But she is a leading thought leader and policymaker on child sex offenders. And so when I interviewed her, she talked about the need to get out of the building, the need to practice curiosity, and understand people in their own context, to build bridges between Republicans and Democrats, between the families of those who've been abused and the families of the offenders, and how to navigate a system that is really broken. It is not child-centric at all. So it was really cool to understand the ways that she applied creativity, wonder, and rigor in her work. And this is John Parker, our family plumber. And when I asked John if I could interview him for my book about creativity, he was like, really? I was like, yeah, I want to interview you about what you do. He's like, okay. So he sat down at my kitchen table, and we had a really amazing conversation. And what was really cool about my interview with John is how poetic his language was. He said, I have to see what's behind the wall. All I go in with is my flashlight. He's really a systems designer because he has to anticipate the needs, especially on a bigger project. He has to anticipate the needs of the carpenters, the electricians. He has to translate what the architect has done, who sometimes has never even stepped foot in the space. So this was an incredible interview to really see the immense amount of creativity that someone like a plumber has to do. So this is creativity. It's not only our assumption about the arts, we have ghettoized creativity into the arts. That's not fair to artists, and it's not beneficial to our society at large. The 4 shifts or the leaps that we have to really make in our educational system and in the way we work is a shift from only valuing rationality, but to also valuing ambiguity, which is only increasing. We have to leap away from only coveting our tribes, and there's a lot to say about today, especially in our political environment, to also valuing community. Tribes are subsets of community, but it's important to branch out of community, which means the roots, in order to have understanding between groups of people. We also have to begin to value not only deep specialization, but polymaths. Polymaths are, an infamous polymath was Leonardo da Vinci, right? Who was a physicist and an astronomer and an artist and a writer, right? We need the ability to develop what some people call pie-shaped thinking, multiple depths and breadths, which only comes through curiosity. And we can't lean too much on the rule book, but we also have to embrace improvisation. So, I'm going to start to explain, we're starting to explain some domains we can exercise to develop creativity. Because creativity is a productivity play in future work. It's not some frilly add-on. It's essential for us for companies to answer Larry Fink's call to really start to make very different investment decisions because our Earth, for example, has finite resources. And creativity is a competency. And it loves constraints. So whenever I work with clients and say, well, we just don't have the time, we don't really have enough money, or we don't really have the right people in place, perfect. That's even better. Creativity loves constraints. It's that funnel of pressure where the best stuff happens. So those of you who know me, that kind of like a seminal growing part of my work and my intellectual point of view was this idea of chaotic systems thinking. And as it turns out, creativity is a chaotic system. And the word chaotic is a made-up word that D. Hock made up. And D. Hock was the founder of the Visa credit card. And when he was asked to become head of Visa, the credit card you have in your wallet, he thought, jeepers, I have to figure out how to manage and organize this global organization based on the virtual exchange of currency. We tend to organize our organizations through the boxes and arrows. What if I could have an organization that was modeled much more like what we see in nature? And in nature, there's some chaos and there's some order. And chaos is not anarchy. Chaos is randomness. And order is not control. Order is structure. So creativity is not doing whatever you feel like. You need some boundaries so that you know what to push up against. So So we see chaotic systems in nature. It's how a forest springs to life. Little saplings emerge. So a chaotic system is kind of really stems from chaos theory and complexity. So chaotic systems are emergent. They are self-organizing and they are adaptive. The way our bodies heal is totally a chaotic system. It's localized, self-organizing work if you skin your knee. And jazz music is an example of a chaotic system. The order comes from the incessant practice that the musicians have. They're grounded in music theory. Their composition might have a beginning, a middle, and end. But what happens in the middle, that's the magic. That's the chaos. So I got so into this, I actually developed a card game to help teams practice creativity with these ideas, with balancing wonder and rigor. Available on Amazon, FYI, if you want to check out that. So wonder and rigor is a chaotic system. As I just said, creativity is a chaotic system. Wonder is the chaos part, and rigor is the order. So what's wonder? Wonder is about pausing. It's about audacity and asking big, blue sky, what if questions. It's something that I see increasingly missing from our organizations. We are in this constant churn, and we need to design space and time and processes and systems for wonder, because rigor is not sustainable without wonder. Rigor is equally essential in creativity. Rigor is discipline. It's time on task. It's incessant practice, right? So when we think about creative, sometimes we may naively say, oh, they're so creative. Like, how do they do that? You know, they just pull out their armpit. No, there's an incredible amount of rigor that's in place, along with the opportunity to have wonder. And what artists do better than us, which is why we have ghettoized creativity in the arts, is they do a much better job of setting aside time and space to dwell under the discomfort of ambiguity and to have moments for wonder. So wonder is found in the midst of rigor, and rigor cannot be sustained without wonder. So this creativity leap that I keep referencing is really critical to bridging what we're starting to hear a lot about in terms of the skills gap. The skills gap in terms of the soft skills that people hire. Think about it. Where technology is ubiquitous and where tasks will just be taken over by AI and algorithms, the algorithm still depends on us asking a better question, right? From a human creativity on one end. So I'm going to conclude with 3 tactics to practice wonder and rigor, to practice creativity. And it's what I call the 3I creativity model. The 3 I's are our ability to inquire, to improvise, and to intuit. And I'll give a couple of examples of each. So the first one, inquiry. I fell in love with the work of Warren Berger about 4 years ago. This book, The Creativity Leap, is really probably about 5 years of thinking and working and research. And I have a professional crush on Warren Berger, as we well aware. And he has a great website called The More Beautiful Question. And what I loved about his book is that when he was investigating what we think of as the most innovative companies, he realized that they lead with questions. And here's the Cliff Notes version of his work, but you should still read his work. They tend to start with big, wide questions. Why don't we ever hire people from other sorts of schools? Why do we only hire from those sorts of schools? Why have we never marketed to the Southern Hemisphere? Why? So they start with really divergent questions. They get even bigger. They start to say, well, what if we started to look at hiring from community colleges or people who never had, they have no high school diploma, but have a wealth of work experience? What if we started to look into the Southern Hemisphere for marketing and selling our products? And then they start to converge into how questions. How might we sell to Brazil? How might we start to partner with the local community college, et cetera, et cetera? He referenced a gentleman named Ian Leslie, and Ian Leslie has this great book called Curious. And what I learned from Ian Leslie is that curiosity is the result of an information gap. When you think about that, you have to know just a little bit about something to begin to frame the question to be curious. And as a former professor, there's always this godful moment where you ask a question, or you ask, are there any questions? And just did hands-on. Nothing. We have started to equate curiosity and asking questions with ignorance, which yes, you're ignorant about it, so that you don't know the answer, that's why you've asked the question. But what Warren Berger points out is that asking questions is a way of thinking. And and you can tell a lot about a person by the quality of their questions as much as you can tell about the quality of their answers. So ask the better friend question is my call to action here. As I already said, the algorithm is only going to be as good as the question before. I just have this picture of Ray Dalio, who's the president and CEO of Bridgewater, which has a slightly creepy policy where there's a recording device in every single room at Bridgewater, and his perspective is that, yeah, they recruit some people out, but we get like a 30% of our workforce end up leaving within the first 6 months because they're just not comfortable with that. And then we really end up with the culture people who say, yeah, I actually kind of want to know what people are saying. So there's none of this meeting after the meeting, right? There's the meeting, and then there's all the discussion and whispering about what people really thought. Because of the recording devices where he's built radical transparency and radical curiosity. The second tactic is to improvise. None of us get to work with a script. All of us have to figure out how to be adaptive and active listeners and think on our feet. This is a photograph of Philadelphia's Ritz-Carlton Hotel. In my research back in the day, I worked with the Ritz-Carlton organization to understand the ways that they design experiences for guests. And I used a framework from jazz music to do that. The Ritz-Carlton is an incredibly improvisational organization. I thought they were going to be really stuffy and elitist. They actually are super transparent, open door policy, and an example of how they inspire improvisation and help people think on their feet. Every single day, at every property around the world, there's a meeting that happens whether you're a maid or you work in the boiler room as an engineer or you're in front of the house called the lineup. And at the lineup meeting, you practice asking questions called it stands for Mr. Biz. Mistakes, revisions, breakdowns, inefficiencies, and variations. And it helps people to embrace mistakes, which is one of the cool things about improvisation, which is that there's no such thing as a mistake. In jazz music, it's all about the build, right? So the better you can prepare your team to have a culture of experimentation and rather a culture of shame and a permissionless culture, the better. I've been saying for a while that I think we're going to see a return to the apprenticeship model and a lot more learning by doing. So any university that can partner with organizations to reinvent the apprentice is going to be in really good shape. The last I is about intuition. And intuition is not something that we talk about in business school. It's not something we talk about in medical school. But I started observing when I was working with startup leaders that to a successful entrepreneur, when they would reference their origin story, how they got started, they would say something like, something told me not to do the deal. Something told me to work with her over him, even though her pedigree wasn't as sniffy. I thought, what is this something they keep referencing? And I thought, I think that's intuition. I think intuition is the type of pattern recognition. And we don't touch it in business school. Yet to every successful entrepreneur, they reference it. So I started thinking to myself, well, how could I do like a miniature ethnography on intuitive leadership? So I observed chefs, DJs, dancers, and first responders. Because my assumption was that these are people who need to intuit and have pattern recognition to do the work. DJs are to move the crowd, have to have quite a bit of intuition and pattern recognition. And I really started to hone in on the way choreographers work. And that's really where this idea of rigor came. Because the way dancers work, clearly, there's an intensive amount of discipline. You see it in their bodies, you see it on stage. But we all have been to performances where it's technically proficient, it's on point, but it doesn't really hit you here. And I was like, what's that other thing? And that's where I started thinking about the counterpoint of wonder. So intuition is a type of pattern recognition. And by the way, as humans, we are hardwired to actually exercise our intuition. There's something in everyone's body called the vagus nerve. It's the only nerve in our body that makes sense from our cranium, down to our heart, into our gut. So we literally have an internal wiring to connect mind, heart, and gut. So when we're talking about thinking on our feet, and my gut tells me, there's really a physiological reason for that. So mind that gap, pay attention to your intuition. So this is the 3I framework. And I'll end with just a few tips on how you might start practicing these 3 I's. Insist on having creative abrasion teams, which I think, from what I remember, they do a pretty decent job of really insisting on that. I know students hate it, but it's really a huge payoff. Secondly, become a clumsy student. Even if you are a university student right now, I'm not talking about just your studies, because there's this emphasis to get the A, to really focus less on the process and more on the numerical outcome. What I mean is really hone in on a hobby where you're really pitiful. And you really have to feel clumsy. And you have to get really good at asking questions and reframing questions. And you have to be really good at active listening and reinterpreting the way you heard and understand something and listening to your gut. And third, that's for improvisation, excuse me. And then for intuiting, start to journal and document the times that you've actually followed your intuition. What was the outcome? And also document the times when you didn't. What was the outcome? And begin to have this internal database that assures you that there's something to this internal wiring. And lastly, there really is a business case for creativity. If you're not convinced yet, this is actually from my website, because sometimes when I introduce myself as a creativity strategist, it's a disconnect for folks, and I have to really explain to them creativity is the engine for innovation. All of this talk of wanting to innovate, we have to pause and start with creativity. Why? Because creativity leads to our inventive thinking. And if you have inventive thinking, you come up with business models, better strategic partnerships, and more interesting revenue streams. If you emphasize creativity, you by default have to work collaboratively. When you start to work collaboratively, you improve efficiencies. When you improve efficiencies, you lower costs. And thirdly, if you are focused on being creative, you have to fall in love with your customers' problems. You become customer obsessed, and that leads to sustained brand loyalty. This is a quote that I love from the jazz bassist Charlie Mingus, who said that making the simple complicated is commonplace. But making the complicated simple, awesomely simple, that's creativity. I want to end by asking you, if you would like to receive my newsletter, if you would like to receive a link to a free downloadable sample chapter of my new book, you can right now text the word create to the number 33777. And it doesn't matter if it's all caps or if it's little letters and big letters. But if you do that, you'll get a couple of question prompts, and then we can stay in touch. I would love to do that. So text the word create to 33777. And that's it. Thanks so much. In the interest of curiosity, I brought presents. I brought gifts. My website, she uses to incentivize people to ask questions. So you too could be the proud owner of one of these sets of 3 cards if you ask a question. Even if it's an observation, try to frame it as a question. Why, what if, how might we? Any questions? Yes. Oh, yeah. So thank you for that, because I forgot to reference this. So there's a faculty member at Harvard's School of Professional Studies named Chris Dee, who I met about a year ago, and he and his colleagues developed something called the 60-year curriculum. And they developed this thing called the 60-year curriculum because they realized that the way universities and colleges tend to be designed is to only, here's your president, is to only designed for curriculum that will help people, like, assuming that they're going to go to grad school 2 or 3 years after college. But the reality is that these kind of jagged journeys of a career mean that we really have to not only prepare people with mindsets to think 60 years out, but also offer opportunities for continuous learning. And one of the things they also emphasize this idea of apprenticeship. So in the traditional apprenticeship model, there's like the journeyman, and then and finally there's a culture where people knew that certain individuals were in this space of learning and learning by doing. They would be taken in. They had very limited income. So we don't quite have that. But what if we had corporations that realized they would actually be much more productive and efficient, and they created a different layer of creative operation and have people, not just young people, but people at different stages of life who could add value to the work at hand. I'm sure there'd be a lot of legalese involved and all those sorts of things, but the idea of learning by doing, and that's by seeing how young people are increasingly opting out of college, just pushing the ROI. But when I was at Doha Qatar, the reason I was there was to serve as a coach for this 10-day entrepreneurship boot camp. And I've worked in this organization since 2015, and these are students from all over the world. And every time I get into like hallway conversations, coffee conversations with these young people, they're between ages 20 and 27, I will have a variation of a conversation where they say, yeah, my professors are smart, and school's fine, but I'm really teaching myself cryptocurrency. And me and my roommate were really starting to start working, right? So there's this signal on the landscape that people want to learn doing. And actually, I think most of us learn best in these laboratory environments, in these studio environments. When I was on faculty here, one of the coolest things I thought when I shifted from teaching, I never taught too much stage on stage. It was never that I like to learn. I would try to teach more seminar style, but my teaching was totally disrupted as I learned about design thinking with my PhD studies. My classes were noisy. I presented out like for 20 minutes, and I valued the co-learning that students would have with each other. We would bring in traditionally trained academics, but also practitioners. So I hope that answered your question. That's kind of what I'm getting at when I talk about a new apprenticeship model. Hi.
Hello. Just out of curiosity, what
I taught the business of fashion. I taught fashion management. I taught a lot of courses in fashion management. Everything from like material science to testing to merchandising classes. My favorite classes in those days were classes where I had fashion design, fashion merchandising, and fashion management students all together, and sometimes textile design students as well. Because again, it was that inkling back then of how much the students were gaining from each other and their own internships. And then I taught in the strategic design MBA program, a branding course and a business model innovation course. You get a prize too. Hi.
Hello. I was just wondering if when you talked about like being like a clumsy student and like going outside of like the realms of learning to ask questions, do you mean like specifically in your major, or do you suggest to go outside of that and find a different hobby outside of your major?
Excellent question. I suggest you go way outside of your comfort. For example, I studied dance since I was 4 years old because I'm clumsy, and also because my mom observed when I was tiny that I seemed to like to move a lot in the prison session. So right now I study a little bit I've read about in my little bio. I'm taking down past Young Avenue and Side Hill dance. I'm taking tango and salsa and foxtrot. I exercise regularly at this great studio called Dance Fit, which I think is also in Fishtown. And I take hip hop classes there. I'm not as good as I used to be. My body has changed. But it helps me my memory, and it's just also really fun. I also want to learn how to do pickling of vegetables, so I can eat meats better, and that will be something that I'm also good at. And I want to learn how to play poker, because everything shows on my face, and I would like to develop a bit more poker face. So I think that maybe if I study poker, I would better at that. Probably not.
How does
That's a great question. Well, I think the reason why storytelling with this level of creativity is because it requires us to think temporally and spatially. What I mean by that is when we're crafting story, when we're making story, we have to think about historical context. We also think about how this will help people moving forward. So that's what I mean by through time. We have to think on that plane. But I also think it helps us spatially because there's so many ways that we pick up ideas, information, tell story. There's tactile ways of walking through an art gallery. There is playing, and there's like the stickiness that happens through interaction. It's all of those things that are really activating the wonder, as well as the rigor that requires that structure of story. If you think about like a basic narrative structure, like hero's journey, there are all these peaks and valleys and arcs that's the structure, right? That's the rigor part. The wonder part is what are you plugging in? What's the cultural context that you understand about something? So think, well, let's look, like, our daughter is really into comedy, and she's always hipping us to all these cool comedians we've never heard of. She's a freshman in college now, she's thinking about taking like an improv comedy sketch writing class. And comedians are superb story crafters, right? They're so interesting in what part of the story they lead you into, they move around, they bring it back in, and another part of the acting, they like return to it, right? So it requires all these elements of being able to improvise, to intuit, to be really curious, to understand how could I best explain this observation and why I think it matters to our society. I think our comedians are modern day groups, right? They're reflecting our society back to us. They're talking about stuff that is really hard for us to talk about, even with our families, right? And the humor is how we can kind of cut the tension. Hi.
I've noticed these things going on based on the fact that people are the structure. So the structure and that creativity and being able to display, figure things out, and gone.
Yeah.
So what is one thing you would be able to tell a class of science makers why creativity is so important?
So I wouldn't tell them, I would have them do. And so here's an exercise you might try, which I use to this day, something called quiet storming. So whatever your lesson or your topic is that you're going to be dealing with in this science class, whether or not they've done the reading like they're supposed to.
They don't.
Yes, and this can be done in like 3 minutes. So that can be done in 5 minutes, but you have a timer. And this is a muscle that they actually will get better at. And some might feel clumsy at first, and that's natural. But you set a timer for 60 seconds, 90 seconds in utter silence, whatever the prompt is. Folks have to respond just through consciousness, their answers to that prompt. One idea per post-it, right? And then at the end of that time, so this is also the big pair share, which is a pedagogical tool, right? So soul, they're thinking quietly to themselves. Then they pair off maybe to the person sitting next to kind of compare notes how they thought about that idea, and then maybe in big group or to the entire classroom share out. And that is a way that you can then refer back to how creative they were and generative they were, how much active listening they exhibited. So rather than just like having to tune out because you're yammering on about how important creativity is, like let them feel it and do it, and show with each other, which will be something to try. Sure. Question? Yes. Oh yeah. Oh good. By the way, this is just a gimmick. I have a lot of these. So if you want one, you can have one. But thank you for Polymath the gimmick and asking such good questions. Yes.
How would that creativity in terms of what's
It's educated.
It's away from the topic. How does that?
So the topic's not creativity, the topic is biology, or the topic is management, so you mean, how, no,
If I'm working on something that I just,
yes.
I'm trying to get the person to understand the creative aspect, how does that understand that? If we're not trying to do.
Could you ask the question in a different way, maybe like use an example, you're not, maybe not trying to say specific, but what's another way of saying that?
How do I get my profession to understand why?
Okay, that was clearer, okay. Well, that's a great question, and in the design thinking space, we like to say that we start with empathy, right? Design thinking is a problem-solving process. We start with empathy. We value prototyping, fall in love with the rough draft of the mock-up of something. We value lateral thinking and story. Well, we often gloss over that first stage of empathy. And going back to this model that I have, let me leave up the slide for you. Rather than curiosity is the precursor to empathy. So before you can empathize, you must be curious. You must want to understand, why does that person always sit over there? Why? Why do they approach it in that way? That's an interesting way. I would have never said it that way. Why? You know? So the bridges for intercultural and intercultural understanding, in this case, a white professor who is who a black student may not feel is connecting with them, they have to start with curiosity, which means that you don't assume you're the expert. Which is really hard to do. I mean, teaching is probably the only, maybe shepherding is another, it's the only profession in the world, like you close that door, you're the only one. Like, you don't work with your colleagues, right? So there's a lot to be broken down in terms of co-creation and co-learning and that sort of thing. But it would have to start with curiosity. Before that person can even empathize. They have to even acknowledge that they have assumptions. They have to even acknowledge that they need to frame things as a question. Where does that come from? That's the culture of the organization, to really encourage the faculty to do some kind of self-reflection and to frame these sorts of questions. Okay, thank you very much.